different types of organizations. So the covert action operations go on. And as a matter of fact, not only in Bulgaria did they overturn this government. I didn't even finish that story, but what happened is all this money from National Endowment for Democracy went in, and they fomented student strikes and demonstrations, trade union strikes, massive street protests, and not only was the money put in by the National Endowment for Democracy, but also Paul Weyrich's Free Congress Foundation got involved. And this is part of the Christian right, you know. He's the man who runs all these different organizations out of the same address in Washington, D.C. And this Free Congress Foundation also got going in there, I guess in coordination with what the CIA was doing, what NED was doing, and so forth. And so the elections were in June. The communists had, or the former communists had won. By the end of November, they were out because they made the country ungovernable. In 1991, they did the same thing in Albania. They had elections there. Free, fair, no fraud. Former communists won. The United States got in there through these different organizations and the CIA, naturally, and they made Albania ungovernable.
Chile, same thing.
Chile, same thing. Brazil in the early 60s, same thing. We were doing the same thing when I was in Ecuador. In fact, we had two coups, two unconstitutional changes of government when I was there, and they were largely due to what we were doing. And by the time I left, after 3 years, we had what we wanted, a four-man military dictatorship that was carrying on a very strong repression against them. After the coup, to form let's say a militant action force to balance the forces of Lavalas, that's the Aristide political movement. And so they form the Front for Progress of Haiti or something like that. It's known as FRAP. You know, F-R-A-P-H, yeah, FRAP, yeah. And so anyway, he organizes this thing, and the CIA pays him to do it. And he's on payroll, they're paying the expenses, and meanwhile these people are killing thousands of Haitians, all on Aristide's side, naturally. And it was just as dirty as you can imagine. And there we were behind this. And this is covert action of the 1990s. I mean, it's not like rigging an election or something. It's worse than that in terms of human cost. And all this has come out thanks to the digging of Alan Nairn and the publication of his findings in The Nation magazine. So Haiti is one of those countries which the United States, you know, it's like the rotten apple theory, you know. Noam Chomsky talks about this all the time, you know. If you get one rotten apple in the barrel, you know, it's going to spread to all the others. And so that's why they can't even allow a Haiti, as miserable as the country is, terrible, to reorganize for social justice. It's just, well, another eternal shame on the United States, I guess. But now that Aristide is back in, they're probably doing everything they can to defeat his forces, and it's not working.
Afghanistan.
Oh, Afghanistan.
Afghanistan is absolute chaos and mess.
The what you'd call in Spanish secuela, the aftermath of the Afghan intervention is still going on today. You read about it in the paper every single day, and the numbers of people there have been killed are astronomical. The numbers of refugees is way up there in the millions, and all because of a movement which took control in the country back in the 80s, and which was going to modernize Afghanistan. They were going to change the status of women, who until that time were men's chattels. They were going to educate women to read and write, and Afghanistan at that time was living in the past, with just a few core sectors, you know, which had the education in the West and so forth. And the agency got in there with the Chinese and the Pakistanis trying to support the opposition to this social development program before the communists took over in Afghanistan and before the Soviets intervened. But what is interesting to me is, in the aftermath, how many of these Arab volunteers, Afghanistan is not an Arab country, but they had a lot of volunteers, Islamic fundamentalists from the Arab countries, who went as volunteers to fight in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, they were volunteers from Algeria, from Morocco, from all of North Africa, Egypt too, Sudan, and other Arab countries, and they went there as volunteers, and they fought. First, they were trained in how to handle the weapons and so forth in these camps provided by the CIA. And then they saw action on the front lines. Well, when it was over, they're called Afghanis in their home countries because they'd gone off as volunteers, even though they're from Arab countries. So these Afghanis, so-called Afghanis, they went back and then they started to foment fundamentalist revolution in their own country. So you see what's happening in Egypt or in Algeria right now. This Algerian civil war has taken 35,000 lives, they say. But this is being run, and some of the main forces there have served in Afghanistan with the meal ticket from the CIA and the training and so forth. Same thing in Egypt with the so-called Islamic group there. And of these people who were tried in New York, on the two cases, you know, one the World Trade Center bombing and the other the conspiracy trial for the tunnels in, you know. I think half of those were trained in Afghanistan. So, well, I think that the most important things that should be changed, and I don't have any hope right now of changing these things, but the most egregious activities are the subversion and overthrow of democratically elected civilian governments and their replacement with military dictatorships of the highly repressive type that institutionalize torture and disappear people and so forth. That is one thing that we should really try to eliminate because it's a disgrace on the United States. The CIA's support to murderous security services around the world is another area that really should be looked into. And these most recent revelations on Guatemala and the CIA connections with the murderers of the American Michael Devine and the husband of Jennifer Harbury, the American lawyer, that is indication that these types of support to these security services continuing. And it was happening from the 50s on. I was involved in those activities myself in the 60s. Those have got to be stopped. And then I would say the third area that really should be looked into is the general area of covert intervention in the affairs of other countries. And not just to overthrow, but to try to control and manipulate their institutions of power, whether it be the press or whether it be women's organizations or whatever. And so this is my wish list. But I don't have the slightest hope that it's going to happen, because I think that all of these CIA activities are a product of the domestic system in the United States. And until we change the domestic system in the United States, reordering the power structure here, then these things are going to go on, because they are needed by a very few in this country, few and powerful interests. And they relate very closely to the operations of multinationals abroad, U.S.-based multinationals abroad. But it is a period of transition right now in the world at large. It is the largest and the most important period of transition since the late 1940s into the early 50s. It's only a window of opportunity. Decisions are going to be made now about the use of the intelligence services and a lot of other international priorities and domestic priorities in the United States. And I think that everybody who is concerned should be involved in this, but not alone, in concert with others, because an individual, as in the trade union movement, you know, an individual worker has no power at all. He can be fired and replaced at will. But if workers unite and a trade union with strength, then they have power. And the same thing goes in the political scene or cultural scene or whatever else other sector you may speak of. And so that is why it's so important for people to be involved in groups, the group of choice. And there are many activities out there to be engaged in, such as solidarity with Cuba to try to break down that blockade of 35 years, or with Guatemala. So there is something out there for everyone, and we only have ourselves to blame if we don't take action now. It's not hopeless, but you see how the United States is going around in these areas of economics and of trade and of commerce and finance to try to make the Cuban people suffer as much as they can. And this is affecting, in a drastic way, very young children and infants, and also the older, in other words, the most vulnerable. And it is an eternal shame on the United States, in my opinion, that we would do such a thing to an entire country, just because we don't like the system, just because they won't come under our protection, basically. It's a kind of a mafia attitude, and it has been that way since Eisenhower.
Well, that's capitalism.
Well, it's also the United States, and
Yeah.
our tradition of being very nervous when we don't control something. And when a country like Cuba slips out from under our control, after we had ruled it practically as a neo-colony or a protectorate for 59 years or so, then it makes people nervous, because they know that if the Cubans are successful in their example of being able to provide, as a poor country, the best medical care in the third world to the whole population, because it's an inclusionary system. It's not like we have here, where you have this huge bulk of the population, you know, marginalized. But there, if everybody can have adequate medical care, if the schooling is adequate for all, and remember, Cuba has more doctors and more teachers per capita than any country in the world, and they have succeeded in these areas, and it's all state supported, which means people don't have to put money out for the medical care, or for they of course pay the cost indirectly as a whole society, but they don't have to pay the bill in the hospital and so forth. And so that cannot be allowed to stand. It's a very bad example for the United States and for all the third world people in the United States. After all, we're becoming a third world country very fast, if not already, you know.
Not already, yeah.
And so there is a very large mass of people out there who can look at Cuba and say, well, if they can do it, and on a per capita income of $2,000, $2,500 a year, where ours is $22,500 a year, what's wrong with our system? I mean, maybe we ought to consider an alternative.
That's why Nicaragua, Sandinista Nicaragua, had to be destroyed.
Exactly. They were a bad example, and that's why Grenada had to be destroyed, because any movement that comes to power with the idea of providing for all the people and of escaping the control of the United States and its economy, let's say the corporations and so forth, then that is bad news here in the United States in the upper circles of power and influence. And so in Nicaragua, I watched it from the very beginning. I was often there, and